Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Wildfong, and I'm with Seeds of Diversity Canada. Today, I'm going to talk about seed and food security, which is something that's really important right now. When we talk about seed security, we're talking about the same kind of thing as food security, and maybe you're very well familiar with food security being the desire to have a safe and reliable supply of food that's the right kind of food for people. Well, we need the right kinds of seeds in order to grow that food, and that's generally what we mean by seed security too. It's having a safe, reliable supply of seeds that we can use to grow the right kinds of food to achieve food security. That's a very important thing. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of effects of changes to the climate, changes in the way that we grow things. There are changes all around. And as those changes become more and more severe, as those changes become more and more apparent, and as they affect the way that we grow our food, it will become more and more important to have a safe and reliable supply of seeds that we can use to grow the food we need. Now, we have a lot of experience in how to adapt the food system. We've been doing it for a very long time. If you think about what people used to eat 20 years ago, it's different than what people eat now. And if you looked at what people ate 40 years ago, that's different also. And going back through time, we see that people ate different kinds of food. They grew their food differently, they cooked their food differently, and we have lots of change over the last couple of hundred years that can give us a guide to how we need to change our food system in order to adapt to the changes and challenges of the next 20 years. The fact is, when we've changed our food, we've changed the kinds of seeds that we've planted. And here's a picture that sort of represents all the different kinds of food, all the different kinds of crops and food plants that we had 100 years ago. We estimate that there were probably around 35,000 different kinds of food plants in Canada 100 years ago. And it was by using all those different kinds of food plants that we could change the food system. Well, what happened in the last 100 years is seeds went from being something that people grew themselves to something that became a seed company product. There were fewer people saving seeds, and that means fewer different kinds of seeds available. It meant people grew the same kinds of plants all across the country. Every farm, every garden would wind up having the same kinds of tomatoes and the same kinds of wheat and the same kinds of potatoes. And that's the situation we're in today. When people stopped saving their local community heritage varieties, we lost those. We don't have those anymore. And a full 3/4 of all the different kinds of plants we had 100 years ago are extinct now. We only have a quarter of them left. So that's maybe one of our big challenges, is making the changes we need to make with only a quarter of the resources that we had when we were changing our food system over the last century. Even more concerning right now is if you look in seed catalogs at all the different kinds of food plants that you could grow. It looks like a lot, but really that's only about 12% of everything that's left. If you think of 1/4 of this pie is what we have actually remaining to us, only the little green sliver is what you can buy. The rest of it are heritage varieties that are in seed banks, which you can't get. Maybe they're grown by seed savers, which you can get, and we'll talk about more how you can do that. We would like to have that whole quarter. It's not what we used to have, but we'd like to have all of it available to people instead of just that little tiny green sliver. For example, here are 5 names of some common garden vegetables that you might know. These are just 5 pretty common varieties that you can buy in seed catalogs. Those are what represent that little green sliver. Now, for every 5 varieties that you can find in seed catalogs, there will be this many that exist, but you can't get them from seed catalogs. They're out there. They're in seed banks. Seed savers might be growing them in their backyards and saving seeds, offering them at seed swaps, but you can't buy them at seed companies. And for every 5 of those green ones that you can find in a seed catalog, there are this many that have died out in the last 100 years. These are real varieties that we see in old seed catalogs that we would love to grow, but they're gone. So I like to think of seeds in a big way. I like to think of seeds as humanity's greatest achievement. And you might think at first, well, that kind of sounds preposterous to say that seeds like this lettuce here and this wheat here are humanity's greatest achievement. Well, let's think about where they came from. Okay, here's lettuce. And lettuce, you're looking at the lettuce on the right-hand side and saying, well, yeah, there's the lettuce. And what's that weed over on the left? Well, that's also lettuce. A few thousand years ago, that's what lettuce looked like. It grows in southern Europe, and we know that the Romans ate lettuce. But what they ate was this sort of weedy plant with sort of sharp prickles on it. They would steam it, boil it, cook it, and only when it was very, very young and tender is it possible to eat it. It's more of something like you would cook a Swiss chard or beet greens or something like that. You don't normally eat those raw. You steam them or cook with them in some way. That's how lettuce had to be eaten. But over thousands of years, people found some lettuce plants that were a little bit softer, more delicate, a milder flavor. And if they were smart, and fortunately they kept seeds from those slightly better lettuce plants, and eventually they bred all the things that we call lettuce today from this weedy plant. Now you can find this wild lettuce growing in just anywhere in Canada. It grows all over the place. It has spread here from southern Europe, and now it's just a general weed. We don't eat it, right? We eat the lettuce that we've created over thousands of years. Now imagine this. What if we didn't have lettuce? It means we could make it. We could take seeds from the wild plant and just do all that over again and breed modern domestic lettuce from the wild one. But it took thousands of years to do it. And it took hundreds and hundreds of people working and working and working during that whole time. Even the best plant breeders and the smartest plant scientists would have a huge challenge in turning that wild lettuce into what we already have and what just regular farmers produced over thousands of years. It's an immense achievement by all of our ancestors to have created all the plants that we currently eat, because most of the plants that we eat don't exist in nature. They're plants that we made and bred from wild plants. Here's another example. Wheat over on the right. That's a modern wheat. We're not really even sure where modern wheat comes from because it's so different from any wild plant. But here's a pretty good likely candidate for one of the ancestors of wheat. It's a grass that it grows in the Middle East, and wheat is probably a combination of several of these kinds of grasses that interbred and were domesticated and eventually were bred by people over 10,000 years into modern wheat. In order to do that again, if we didn't have wheat and we wanted to make it again, it would be an enormous achievement to take these wild grasses and somehow turn them into the thing that we eat every day. It is an enormous legacy of literally millions of farmers not educated in plant breeding, not trained in the methodology of genetics, but just intuitively realizing that one plant is a little bit better than another one. So it would be a good idea to keep seeds from that better plant and plant those seeds next year and have a slightly better crop. You do that thousands and thousands of times and you can produce our food. That's where it came from. And we could not ever replace it. Now think about that 3/4 of all those food varieties that all those farmers produced. 3/4 of them are extinct in the last 100 years. We must preserve the other quarter because we can't recreate it. Where are all these seeds? Well, most of them are heritage varieties. And sometimes when we think about heritage varieties, we sort of think that they're sort of the unusual old ones. It turns out that when you look at all the plant varieties that we have available to us still today, about 80 or 90% of them are heritage varieties. There are relatively few modern ones. And if you think about the reason for it, it's that every few years we have a new introduction, a new modern variety. And And every year there are actually a few hundred new modern varieties. So you add those up over the last, say, 50 years, and there are only a certain number of new varieties that have come out during that time. But look at the legacy of thousands and thousands of heritage varieties that are still around. They vastly outnumber all the new ones. So it turns out that the genetic foundation of our food system is the heritage varieties. The reason is that they're quite different from each other, and they're interesting, and they have different characteristics that maybe come in handy at certain times, and maybe we haven't even realized how some of them are useful. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Where are they? Well, maybe people are familiar with this. This is the famous global seed vault. You've probably read about this, a seed bank that's buried in a permafrost of an Arctic island in an archipelago that's owned by Norway. It's called Svalbard, is the name of the place. And they took an old mine shaft and converted it into a seed bank. It's underground in the permafrost, where it's always very, very cold. And as you probably know, that's a great place to keep seeds when they're frozen. They last for a very long time. This polar seed vault is very far away from any kind of political unrest. It's a very peaceful kind of place. It's hard to get to, so pirates or vandals or something are unlikely to go and try to steal the seeds. It's just a really safe place to put all of our seeds. And so they currently hold about 1 million samples of crop seeds that are from seed banks all around the world. They're kind of like the seed bank of seed banks. And here's one of their clients. Canadian government uses the Svalbard seed vault as a backup. Our main seed bank here in Canada is at the University of Saskatchewan. That's in Saskatoon. And underneath a building on the campus of the University of Saskatchewan, there is a smaller seed vault than the one that's in Svalbard, but it works the same way. It's a great big freezer. They keep about 100,000 samples of seeds in that freezer in paper envelopes. They're kept dry, they're kept cold, and they should last for a very long time. They only have a small amount of each kind of seed. As you can imagine, if you have 100,000 samples of seeds, you can't have a lot of any of them. And so that means the seeds are not generally available. They're just sort of kept there, and then small numbers of seeds can be sent for researchers or for plant breeders or for seed companies who are going to multiply those seeds out and sell them. That's what it is for. That means that you and I can't just sort of get these seeds. It's really interesting to see 100,000 different kinds of seeds, but there are so few of each kind we can't get them. So that's where seed savers come in. Seed savers are people, gardeners, farmers, who are saving seeds from their gardens and from their fields and either planting them again themselves or giving the seeds or selling the seeds to other people. That's where we all get our seeds. We're getting our seeds from seed companies who are selling them, from seed savers on farms who are maybe producing good quantities of those seeds and offering them in different ways, or we're getting our seeds from backyard gardeners. Maybe you go to a Seedy Saturday seed swap and pick up some good seeds that were produced by a local gardener. The more people who do that, the more different kinds of seeds can be available to us, and that means more seed diversity. That means more seed security, because we have a greater supply of different kinds of seeds that we can use to grow the food we want. It means more people are producing seeds, which means the whole system for those seeds is more resilient. Seed savers. This is what Seeds of Diversity is all about. We are, in essence, a kind of a bridge in between the seed saving community and the seed banks. So over on the left here, that's Rachel, my friend, who saves, in this case, some very nice tomato seeds. She can exchange those with other people in the community. She can offer them at a Seedy Saturday seed swap. Seeds of Diversity has a way of getting some of those seeds into the seed banking system so that they can be stored there and preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years, theoretically. We have, that way, an indirect connection to that Svalbard seed vault. So some of Rachel's seeds could actually wind up being backed up in that polar, remote Norwegian seed bank. What's more important to me is that it also provides a conduit from that seed banking system to the seed savers. I said before that the seed bank doesn't have enough seeds to be able to offer generally seeds to just anybody. They just don't have enough quantity. But through Seeds of Diversity, we can access those seed banks and make those seeds available to people. And that's where seeds should be. They shouldn't be locked up in seed banks. They should be in the hands of people who can grow them and eat the produce and save the seeds and pass those seeds on to other people. That's what it's really about. And that's the other really important function that Seeds of Diversity has, is not just sending seeds into the seed bank or getting them back out again, but distributing the seeds among the people who actually can use them. One of the ways we do this is through a program that we call our seed library. We collect rare kinds of seeds that we find at seed swaps when we have information about a seed company that might be going out of business. We'll adopt some of the seeds that they have. If they're varieties that we don't have in other places, we'll get seeds from people's collections. Very often we have older seed savers who simply get too old to look after their collection anymore, and they need a new home, someone to literally adopt their seed collection. We have the capacity to do that through our seed library, and we can recruit seed savers all across Canada to help keep that seed collection intact and alive. We also do this through our member seed exchange, which is a grassroots member-to-member seed exchange. We have members all across the country who save seeds from their backyards and offer them through the mail directly to other members. So if you become a member of Seeds of Diversity, and membership is free, all you have to do is contact the person who is growing those seeds, send them a few dollars for the postage, they'll mail the seeds to you. We have now 2,396, just about 2,400 different kinds of seeds in our seed exchange, which makes it the largest accessible source for seeds in Canada. Another thing we do is we keep track of all the different kinds of seeds that are available from seed companies in Canada. And we do this mainly so that we know which varieties are common and which are not so common, so we know where to put our efforts in conservation. So we've made literally an index of all the seed catalogs in Canada, and you can find it on our website. It currently lists just about 7,800 different varieties of seeds. That's a lot of different kinds of tomatoes and beans and squash and everything you can think of, all indexed from 93 Canadian seed companies. Like I said, the purpose of this is so that we know where to put our efforts as a conservation organization. If I see that a certain kind of bean is only available from one company, then we know that maybe we should adopt that variety of bean into our seed collection, so that if that company were to drop it from their catalog, we would still have some of those seeds. And we could pass them on to a seed saver, we could put it in our member seed exchange, we would be able to preserve that variety. Whereas, let's say we look in our index and we see that a certain kind of bean is available from 40 different seed companies, then I wouldn't worry about that one so much. I wouldn't use our effort and our donors' money to look after that seed because it's being really well perpetuated by those 40 seed companies. So that one's looking after itself for the time being. We update this index every year so that we can keep track of which varieties are in need of being rescued and which of them aren't. More useful for gardeners, though, is that this is a free resource. You can just find it on our website, and if you happen to be looking for a particular variety, then this is a pretty direct way to find a source, or many sources maybe, for the seed that you like best. So we've looked at how diversity is important for preserving the integrity of the food system, for making sure that we can grow the food that we want, for having a reliable source of the seeds that we can use for growing that food. We've looked at how seeds are preserved in seed banks, how they are made accessible through seed exchanges and seed libraries. Now, let's think about the long term of seed and food security. What is it that we need to do in the next, say, 20 years or the next century in order to ensure that we have a strong, reliable and safe food and seed system. And you can sort of see some of the challenges that I'm getting at. The top picture here, that's a cornfield. That is a unfortunately drought-stricken cornfield. That corn will never mature. It is just too dry, waiting for it to rain, and it's probably too late for even that if it did. Whereas the bottom picture is the opposite problem. Sometimes we hear about droughts, sometimes we hear about floods, and these days we're hearing more about both of them. Neither of them are good for agriculture. And this is the kind of situation that we're trying to wrap our heads around, of how we will have a reliable food system in the next century when we have these extremes of weather challenges and climate challenges. Some of the strategies, there are three kind of main strategies that we're looking at. One is to get back to local varieties, local seeds for local food. And the second strategy is what many people are doing, trying many of these different kinds of varieties. We have thousands of them left. Let's try them and find the best ones. And the third strategy is recognizing that the second strategy doesn't really work, that we need to build resilience into the system, not just try to find the best varieties. And so I'll explain. First of all, getting back to local varieties, what does that mean? It means that in Canada, we have produced many varieties right here in Canada that are good for our latitude. They're good for the kind of growing conditions that we have in Canada. In fact, we know of over 150 different kinds of tomatoes that have been bred in Canada and at various times have been sold in Canada. But right now, they're really hard to find. If you look in our seed finder, the index of all the Canadian seed catalogs, and try to find all these Canadian bred varieties, a lot of them just aren't for sale. And why is that? The reason is that although these Canadian varieties really make sense here, Canada is a really small part of the seed market. If a seed company is trying to mass market seeds across North America, then Canada is a really small part of that market. The United States is a much, much bigger part of that market. So what is the likelihood that that company would sell Canadian bred varieties instead of selling American bred varieties? The fact is, when you purchase seeds from a large mainstream seed company, and the seeds are marketed all across North America and probably further, the fact is that those varieties are not designed for Canada. They're designed for the U.S. market, where they have a much longer season and a much different growing conditions. The other fact is that those seeds are not grown in Canada. They're not produced in Canada. They might be produced in the States, or they might be produced overseas. Large seed companies often produce their seeds in other parts of the world to be grown here. And that doesn't always give us the result that we need. First of all, we need to buy seeds that are bred for growing in Canada. And the second thing is we need to buy seeds that are actually produced in Canada, so that they are exactly adapted to the conditions here, to the latitude here, to the particular kind of soil that we have here, to the particular kinds of climate that we have here. How do you find those? Well, the answer is you can find Canadian produced seed from many small-scale seed companies that are growing their seeds in Canada, and they're growing Canadian varieties too. How do you find them? You find them through our website, that seed index that I mentioned, and here's the address on your screen. This is the best piece of advice that I can give if you're looking for a way to make your garden more resilient and better able to give you the kind of food that you want to grow here in Canada. Plant seeds that came from Canada. It just makes sense. If the seeds could grow in Canada, then those plants will grow for you. Here's an example of some of the varieties of tomatoes that were produced on the prairies. Throughout the 70s, especially in the 60s and 70s, there were plant breeding programs aimed at developing Canadian varieties of vegetables. We wanted to have some self-sufficiency. And so public plant breeders through Agriculture Canada, some of the universities, some provincial agriculture ministries set about to produce varieties of vegetables and also fruit trees that were particularly adapted to growing in Canada. And many of these, as I said, are not available simply because we buy a lot of our seeds from large-scale seed producers that are selling all around the world. They're selling to the US, and Canada is just not really a big market for them, so they don't bother with the Canadian varieties. You buy your seeds from a Canadian seed company that's growing the seeds in Canada, and you're much more likely to get the kinds of results that make sense for a Canadian gardener. So that's one of our strategies, is get back to the local seeds. If we want local food, we should be planting local seeds. That sounds simple to me. The other strategy, the second strategy, is what I call test and find the best. If we have thousands of different varieties available to us, and sure, it's not anywhere near what used to exist, but we still have enough to work with. So let's work with it. Let's plant all those heritage varieties and see how they grow. The fact is, most of them have not been trialed in many different regions. We know of some that might come from the east. They grow really well in the Maritimes, but we don't know how well they grow in other parts of the country. Vice versa, we know that some have been grown in the west in the past and have been very successful. We don't know much about how they grow in central Canada or the east. So let's try them in different places. Let's try them in different soil and weather conditions. What's really interesting is that much of the testing of vegetable varieties over the last 50 or 60 years has not been done under organic conditions, where all of those old varieties that are from 100 years ago, they were grown mainly in organic conditions. So as we move our food system more and more to an organic model, and if you yourself are interested in organic gardening and you want to grow really good organic food, then looking at the varieties that were developed when organic was the norm, that makes sense. Growing varieties that were bred in the 1960s or 1970s, which most farms were not organic then, those varieties were not really well tested from the very beginning or really well commercialized at that time in an organic setting. And so you might find that the organic bred varieties from a long time ago will actually perform better than some of the sort of mid-20th century varieties that were not field tested under organic conditions by the plant breeders. So that's something to do. We are testing, documenting, learning about all the different kinds of plants and how they grow in different places, and it's a huge job. Add to that not only the Canadian varieties, but also some varieties that might come from other places. And I said before, we want to stick with Canadian varieties because we know that if they're from here, they grow well here. Well, what I really mean by that is we have difficulty sometimes here growing varieties that were bred much further south of here in different conditions because of the length of the season. We have a shorter season here than they do in, say, Texas or California. It's better to work with short season varieties if you're living in a short season. But what about Russia? Russia, say, has the same kind of latitude that Canada has, and in fact, there are a lot of varieties that come from that part of the world that do grow perfectly well in Canada. As far as the seeds are concerned, they don't really know the difference between Canada and Russia as much as they would know the difference between Canada and California. If you see what I mean, there are actually a lot of opportunities, and we want to diversify what we have by bringing in potentially really useful varieties from other parts of the world where they have the same kinds of climate. And that is an area where there's lots of testing yet to be done, there's lots of comparing yet to be done, lots of documentation yet to be done, and it can be kind of a fun adventure to grow something that's a little different and new and document it and then share that information with other people. That's something that Seeds of Diversity does, and you can get involved directly in that. find some seeds in our seed exchange that come from another part of the world that's sort of the same latitude, grow it, and write a really good comprehensive description when you re-offer the seeds through our seed exchange. And you will not only be sharing and multiplying the seed diversity, you'll also be adding to the knowledge that we have about those seeds. But now I'm going to try to explain why testing for the best might not work after all. Because when we're comparing different kinds of seeds from, say, Canada and Russia, and saying, well, they must be sort of similar because they're from the same latitude after all, so they should have the same climate. Is it possible at all to talk about the climate as being the same while the climate is changing? And we are seeing extremes of heat and drought and extremes of rainfall, extreme flooding. There are colder cold and hotter hot than we've seen before. Does it make sense to try to find a variety that grows really well in the heat when it's suddenly going to be a cold year? Does it make sense to find a variety that's really cold tolerant when you find out that you're trying to grow it in a heat wave? Does it make sense to find a drought-resistant variety, the best drought-resistant variety, when you have a really, really wet year? Or vice versa, one that can handle being soggy when suddenly you have a drought. It's too hard to predict. If you knew that you would have a drought, then you could try to plant for that. But you don't know that. You don't know whether it'll be too wet, too dry, too hot, or too cold. And so there's a new kind of thinking. Sometimes we need a whole different way of thinking, and the new way is to say that maybe there's no such thing as a best variety. Maybe there's a best mixture of varieties. So in particular, we might want to mix varieties that are good for drought, good for wet, good for heat, good for cold. And by having that mixture all planted at the same time, then the unpredictable can happen and we'll still have something that can grow well. Okay, I'll give you an example. Seeds of Diversity has a garlic collection. We have about 70 varieties of garlic that have been collected from all over the world, and we grow them every year, and we weigh them, we measure them, so we can get an idea of which of them are the best. Well, it turns out there's no such thing. If you've grown garlic before, you know that sometimes they grow really well. You get great big bulbs, and they're wonderful, and then the very next year they grow really tiny. But then the next year they grow better again. And it has to do with the weather. It has to do with the temperature in the spring. It has to do with the amount of moisture. Some varieties like it a little warmer and some varieties don't. And so you plant the garlic in the fall and you can't predict what the weather will be like in the spring. And when the weather happens, it affects the garlic positively or negatively. And you just don't know. Sometimes you have good years and some years you don't. Well, one garlic grower I know has discovered, and we're not sure whether this is really true. We're trying to assess whether this is actually true. But what we think is happening here is that these two varieties, one is called Music, it's a very popular variety. Another is called Baba Franchux, which is also pretty popular. They vary by the weather, depending on whether it's warm or cold. They grow larger or smaller, but these two seem to do that in opposite ways. So when Music has a good year, Baba Franchux has a mediocre year. But if the Music has a mediocre year, that usually is a good year for Baba Franchux. So here's an example of mixing for resilience. If you're a garlic grower and you just don't know if you're going to have a good year or not, and you'd really like to be able to make sure that you have at least a decent year, the answer might be that the right mix of garlic will ensure that you have a good year every year. Because if you have the right mix, then no matter what the weather is in the springtime, that will affect the size of your garlic, one or maybe more than one of your varieties will grow well. And that means you'll have a good year every year instead of a terrible year followed by a great year followed by a terrible year, which can be really difficult as a grower. So these are some of the strategies we use. The message is that we need plant biodiversity to adapt to change. Throughout the whole last 100 years, our food system has changed. roughly about every 20 years, we have changed what we've grown, the way we've grown it, the way we cook it, plant technology, kitchen technology, even consumer preferences has been leading change in the food system over and over again. And we've adapted to those changes by having plant diversity that has allowed us to grow different varieties of crops. About every 20 years, we change what we grow. We want to be able to do that in 20 years and 40 years and 60 and 100 years. We want to be able to change what we grow. And the only way we can do that is the same way we've built our modern food system, by having options so that we can grow different plants to accommodate whatever challenges or whatever changes are happening in the future. So we're looking for your help. You can help. This sounds like a great big daunting task, but the way we got here is by thousands of regular gardeners and regular farmers saving seeds. Ever since those wild grasses and that wild lettuce, you are the people who created our modern lettuce and our modern wheat, or at least your ancestors, who were just doing the same thing that you do, planting seeds, growing food, saving seeds. Just keep doing that. That's what we need most. You can help, because every gardener can save seeds. Every gardener can be part of preserving our food biodiversity, and you can do that on your own. You can do that in a community garden. You can do that as part of a community seed library, and we welcome members from all across Canada to help us to do this all together. Check out our website, seeds.ca. You'll find all the things I've talked about, our seed finder, which is an index of all the Canadian seed catalogs. You'll find our seed exchange there, which allows members to exchange seeds with each other, and even more important, maybe the descriptions of what they're offering serves as a kind of a documentation of what they've observed in that plant. And with thousands of different kinds of seeds being grown in all kinds of places across Canada, it's really a valuable source of that documentation. So we're pleased to have you as a member and help us out with this. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this.